Thank you very much, Vice-Chancellor, and thank you all for coming tonight on what I think is not the longest day. Yesterday was the longest day, but I hope it doesn't feel like the longest day after this lecture. I've given plenty of lectures in my time. I should be able to do this, but this is a bit weird, frankly. I was thinking it's a bit like giving the vote of thanks at your own funeral. But this is the plan, and we're sticking to it. Right. We are here. There are drinks and food in an hour's time, but between that here and there, we've got a few things to talk about. You might or might not take my advice. I've been to several inaugural lectures in my time, some very good ones. The pressure's on. But my approach generally is to treat it as if it was my last day on Earth. So you can drift in and out of consciousness as the... I'm going to be talking to you about medicine and health. I'm not a medic, and this is by no means an attack on medics, I should point out. But I just do want to show that there is a little bit more to health than hospitals, doctors and nurses. There's a lot more to it. And there's an awful lot of professions that are involved in preventing waterborne disease. I've done a lot thanks to a very supportive group over the last 10 years. And I can't possibly talk to you about it all tonight. So 3 things I thought I'd talk to you about. Microbial source tracking, which is my day job. And I think we've got a pretty good international reputation in this field. And I'll tell you a little bit about that. And then give you some case studies from very recent years. And the last 2 years have been very exciting for me. As the Vice-Chancellor mentioned, I was invited out to Haiti last year. And I'll tell you a little bit about that. More recently, I've visited Malawi 3 times now, and I hope to go out again next month, working with UNICEF on looking at rural drinking. I can't say rural. I was going to try and give a lecture without the letter R, but I failed already. So, water in the countryside. There's an awful lot of people to acknowledge. I mean, everybody says this. This is what they call the Gwyneth Paltrow section, isn't it? But this is not all about me. And then this is the shortest bit, which is what I know. So, an introduction. Take-home message at the beginning, if you don't want to drift off to sleep. It is about ecology and what I feel is microbial ecology and what that can do in collaboration with engineers and other professionals. And you'll be hearing a lot today about the fecal-oral route. This is the basis of tonight's presentation, the fecal-oral route. If you're at all confused and your Latin's not so good, there is a tendency amongst scientists to hide behind Latin, and so we come up with fecal-oral. Well, a very famous microbiologist gets a bit more Anglo-Saxon about it, and he calls it the turd-to-tongue route. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about pathogens in the environment, how they behave, and how we might put barriers in this fecal-oral route or turd-to-tongue route to stop people getting ill. And it's a transdisciplinary field. There's not, if it was just down to microbiologists, frankly, nothing would happen. But microbiologists have a role to play in solving this problem. So, I've seen a few inaugurals, and I know the game plan. You're supposed to show some embarrassing photographs of yourself from your childhood. Tick, done that, got that. And a few quotes. So I thought we'd start off about a bit of my philosophy about teaching, which sounds a bit grandiose, but why am I in this job? I think of myself as an educator. We're talking about research tonight, but it's all tied in with teaching and teaching the next generation of scientists. And for me, somebody else's quote that I saw, Chris Hedges, who said that the true purpose of education is to make minds, not careers. A culture that fails to understand that the measure of a civilization is its compassion, not its speed or ability to consume, condemns itself to death. So, quite a strong statement. But I think an awful lot of people in higher education have a passion for education, a passion for educating the next generation. Sometimes that's lost in discussions in the media about fees and how you can get a top job by how much you have to pay to get a job. There's more to education than that, and I think an awful lot of people in British education realise that, and that's why they're in the job. So I said embarrassing photographs, fast frame history of my life. Well, we'll start here. I'm the one on the left, and these two, I guess, are just village children paid by my parents to come and entertain me. Now, this is my sister Sue and my brother Phil. I'm the baby of the family, as I keep being told. So we'll fast forward to a sludge digestion tank in northeast Brazil in the early 90s. And this happy, good-looking young man was placed there by Professor Duncan Morrow, sent me off to Brazil and said, get on with it. And this was a sort of lab. Well, it was a sludge digestion tank, as I said. When it rained, and it rained a lot, the rain came down on the insides of the walls and came over the fridge, and you got an electric shock whenever you used the fridge. After heavy rain, the sewage from the sewage treatment plant would come into the lab, and you'd have to actually work in wellies. So it got me used to low-tech technology and working in developing countries, an early start to that. So getting older and fast speeding ahead to today, and sadly, I've ended up something like this. It's very embarrassing, but my dad tells me that at a very young age, I said I wanted to be a professor. And he keeps repeating this. It's very embarrassing, but I don't think I wanted to be a professor. I wanted to be Professor Brainstorm. And some of you might remember the books. And at least I'm getting to look like him at least now. So. And thanks to the publishers for allowing me to use that image. So, some more photographs. That's me in Brazil in the middle of the night. Duncan made me analyze the sewage every hour on the hour for 24 hours, and you can see how happy I am about that. There's my co-conspirator, Dr. Rebecca Stott, now living in New Zealand and still a very good friend. I think that's Finland. A sewage discharge in France on a beach, as you do. That one looks like Uganda. So wherever there's some water and a bucket, I'll be there. That's Sussex, that's the River Ouse. You'll be hearing more about the River Ouse today. And normally, when I'm collecting a sample, there's normally a posh lady in the background saying, get off my land. And speeding back to PhD days, the Vice-Chancellor mentioned that I did my PhD work in Portugal, and at that time, my life was about irrigating lettuces with sewage. As you do, somebody has to do it. There's a very good reason for doing that, but I haven't got time to explain that tonight. And this sign says, Portuguese speakers amongst you will know that says perigo de morte, which means danger of death, and there I am. Aren't we amusing, us microbiologists? Nice legs. So, no idea what this one says, forgotten already. Yes, another quote for you. I went to Huw Taylor's lecture a few weeks ago, and he used this quote, so this is going to be our lucky quote for all scientists. We can pass it on like the baton. Claude Bernard, famous French scientist from the 19th century, said that science of life is a superb and dazzlingly lit hall which may be reached only by passing through a long and ghastly kitchen. I'm not sure how that's said in French, long and ghastly kitchen. So, the PhD students from my group who are here today, they probably think that they're sat in the long and ghastly kitchen and I'm in the superb and dazzlingly lit hall. But I think I've sort of knocked through. Some days are a dazzlingly lit hall, other days you're back in the ghastly kitchen. But it's exciting. Final quote, I think. And do you ever wake up screaming in the middle of the night going, oh, did I say that? Or is that just me and my sister Sue? I think it's a family failing. Anyway, in the late 60s, the Surgeon General allegedly said, this was late 60s, a few years, I was 6 years old at the time, he said, it's time to close the book on infectious disease and declare the war against pestilence won. This was a time when antibiotics were doing their job, that TB had reduced enormously, infectious disease was disappearing from the West, and it sounded like a job done. However, since that time, there are 30 new organisms, or organisms that have been discovered and named that are causing disease, and there are more to come. So allegedly, William Stewart said this. Interesting thing about doing some proper research for your lecture is that when you dig around, you think, I can't find any primary source to this. Everybody's saying this. I think this has become an urban myth. But it's quite a useful one. Probably never said it. But there was an opinion around that time that the job was done, there was no future in working in infectious disease. There's a big job to do in infectious disease. So, gradually, as I've continued, I've realized that it's all down to ecology. So a definition of ecology for you, it's the history of microbe hunters and fighting disease as traditionally was about one microbe, one host, and stopping that disease. We now know the interaction between pathogens and other pathogens and the environment and humans is much more complex, and there's no better word for that than ecology. And this has been recognised not by an ecologist in this case, but by a very wise engineer. And I would say a very wise old engineer, but I won't, because it is Duncan Murray and he's sat here, who has been an incredible influence on my professional life and really set me off in this direction. So he's written some brilliant books. He simplifies enormously complex ideas so that even somebody like me can understand them. Really great books. And this comes from one of his books. So you can forgive him for putting it in a black box. He is an engineer, I suppose. But between excreted load, this is somebody pooing, and somebody getting sick, the behavior of organisms in the environment is complex, it is fascinating, and we have an awful lot to learn about it. But as I say, let's cut to the chase, and this is what we're talking about. Some of you medics amongst you will know the Bristol stool chart. At this point, I thought we'd do something like Ready, Steady, Cook, and you could bring up an image of your last motion. But we do have the poo taboo, and people are not happy doing that. So we're talking about diarrhea, frankly, and it is a bit of a joke in Britain. It's an embarrassment. You don't tell people if you've got a dose of diarrhea. It's uncomfortable. It's not very nice. A couple of days, you're better. It's not a problem. But you know what this is leading to. It is very, very serious in many parts of the world. But still on the flippant side, I'm calling it People, Places and Pathogens. I did have some alternative titles. But I won't, because I'm a professor and I'm a grown-up, and also I've run out of puns. I've used all these in lectures in the past, but it's over. No more silly jokes. Anyways, as I say, it is much more serious. This is a photograph that I took in Malawi, and we looked, as I'll say later, we looked at 400 village water supplies. We looked at the water supply drunk every day by 100,000 Malawians. And we saw some very good practice, some charities doing very good work, wonderful pumps producing nice clean water. And then you come across this in an area of Malawi where cholera strikes every rainy season. And in 2012, there is no excuse for this, that a village is dependent on that supply. That is the water that people are drinking in that village. No protection at all. I know this is poverty tourism in a way, that's me taking the photograph, but I think it's a powerful message. And there are 4 billion cases of diarrhea worldwide each year, 2.2 million avoidable deaths because of it. And I'm not very good at maths, but I got the calculator out. Death every 14 seconds, that is the equivalent of 14 Boeing 747s crashing every day with no survivors. But it's hardly ever on the news. It's not news, is it? Because it's always there. Okay, jumping around a bit. How are we doing for time? I'll speed up a bit. Cholera, 1831. So in Britain, infectious disease, many of them have been beaten. Of course, we've got the challenges of HIV and TB coming back and being resurgent. But in 1831, cholera appeared for probably the first time it was recognised in the UK, 1831, and people didn't have a clue how it was caused, and so hence the panic. This was a notice that went up, and it explains how people assumed it was being carried in the air. Instructions are to keep a draft of fresh air in every room, keeping the windows open during the day. There was no idea about germs, no idea about bacteria, anything about waterborne disease. What I notice about this, and I tell my students, that students were particularly at risk because persons of irregular, dissolute and drunken character are most likely liable to its attacks. Jumping ahead to 1853, and the public health geeks amongst you will know all about John Snow and how he did what looks to me like a Victorian version of GIS, Geographic Information Systems, in that there was an outbreak of cholera in Soho, in Broad Street, and he went around finding out where the deaths were, and he found this pattern. It was all focused around this pump in Broad Street. And he was the first person to recognise that this disease was waterborne. He wasn't believed. It took a long time, but eventually the pump handle was removed. And very slowly, during the 19th century, it was realised that cholera was carried by water and wasn't carried in the air. And you'd get cartoons like this in Punch. So, you then had Robert Koch discovered the organisms, or perhaps a guy called Pacini. Filippo Pacini discovered it before him, but didn't have such a good marketing department, perhaps. Anyway, Robert Koch discovered the organism, named the organism Vibrio cholerae. And the medics amongst you, or those from my friends in pharmacy and biological sciences will panic when I say question mark after causative organism. I'm not going into the la-la land of the web denying the germ theory and telling you that you should all be using homeopathy and ear candling. I'm not denying the germ theory. I'm just suggesting that in parallel with the germ theory, we need to think about ecology. We could say, of course, this organism causes cholera, but also you could say poverty causes cholera. What is the causative agent? It's a mixture of things. Time, place, poverty causes disease. So, 3 parts to this lecture. First part is, as I say, the day job, our bread and butter work of microbial source tracking. And it is very much a team effort. It's taken an awful lot of work. And it's nice to welcome back here today people who started out with us back in the 20th century. So Jessica Wallace is here, Jessica Gibson now, who started when there were just 3 of us working together. Now we have 8 PhD students, another 2 starting in September. Whenever anybody tries to promote their field and say it's much more important than your field, I've seen this trick. They go to Web of Science and they look at how many papers were published in their field each year. So I thought, I'll try that. And in 2000, nothing, the words microbial source tracking, nothing at all. And probably a research assessment exercise there or something. But gradually up and up. So it's obviously very important. But then the cynic in me goes, well, hang on. There's an awful lot more publications. So I also put in another set of words and got that. So the blue is microbial source tracking. The red are the words the world is flat. So next time you see somebody promoting their field, think on. Video. Okay, what are we doing now? Microbial source tracking. Right, if I don't explain this very well to you, the BBC explain it much better. They came to our lab a couple of years ago. Go ahead, Emma. Play. Roll VT. Action.
It's every scientist's dream, what they call the eureka moment. Well, it's just happened to a team of bacteriologists at the University of Brighton. Roger Finn has been to see them. He's here with me now. What's the discovery then?
Well, this is a little bit delicate, Sally. When you or I flush the toilet, that's when Dr. Huw Taylor and his team get very interested. You know, we've reported for many years now on the problem of sewage contamination on the beaches and the rivers of the south. Well, one of the challenges is when you get that sort of contamination is to find out where it's coming from. Is it human, or is it from animals, or even seabirds? If you can find out where it's coming from, you can tackle it. And that's the breakthrough that Dr. Huw Taylor has made. For years, these scientists at the University of Brighton's School of the Environment have been trying to find a simple way of detecting whether sewage is from humans or animals. With funding from Europe and help from scientists in Spain and France, they've analysed hundreds of unmentionable samples before they found a bacteria that is only present in the human gut.
Well, it's a bit of a eureka moment, perhaps. I think we actually got the Holy Grail eventually from Skeins Hill sewage treatment works. So perhaps we have a resident of Haywards Heath to thank for this organism.
These are the bacteria they discovered. They're members of a group called bacteroids. Our guts are full of them. They help us digest food. If you pour a sample of water contaminated by human sewage onto them, after a while viruses will start to eat away at them. And that's how you can differentiate between human and animal contamination.
It's got ready applications immediately in the southeast of England. We're already using it on the Ouse catchment and in Pegham Harbour to look at where pollution is coming from, when pollution occurs, whether it's a small event or a major event. We need to know whether it's a sewer discharge or whether it's cattle slurries slipping into the harbour.
In the longer term, the hope is to use the technique in the third world, where water contamination kills 6,000 children every day. Roger Finn for BBC South Today at the University of Brighton.
So thank you, Roger Finn, and to the BBC for allowing me to use that clip. I say some weird things when the camera's put in front of me, but I don't know where the Holy Grail came from. But you are put into this position by the media to play the role of this lone, crazy scientist who has brilliant ideas and talks about breakthroughs. They always talk about, this was Dr. Taylor's breakthrough. They want to simplify things. In that video, you saw somebody wandering around the back like Igor. that was Dr. James Ebden, who did most of the work. And the paper that was based on was Ebden et al., but he sort of disappeared on the cutting room floor. So Dr. Taylor's breakthrough, hardly, that's what actually produced it. It is a big team, it's a lot of work, and working together, we get things done. Another thing, old lefty as I am, I want to point out that we work in collaboration for the benefit of us all. We're not going to set up private agencies and sell our services to each other. That this works because, with mutual respect, we can all help each other, which sounds an awful lot like socialism to me, but there you go. Anyway, it is an interdisciplinary group. I'm a microbiologist, perhaps not a typical one. I think that my career has been about 1/3 enthusiasm and 2/3 attention deficit disorder. And so I've got into a nice field because these are the things that we tackle every day. So if I were to pretend to be an expert on all these, I would be a complete fraud. You do need a team. And in that photograph, I can see a fisheries engineer, a biotechnologist, an environmental scientist, an environmental engineer, and a geologist, amongst other things. So it is interdisciplinary. It's the only way. I'm only going to talk briefly about source tracking. Our method, there are lots other methods are available, but our method, it is cheap. And microbiologists are not that keen on cheap stuff. They tend to like the machines that go ping and the most complex method to do something, and then you go to a laboratory in Africa and you realize that is never going to happen. So our method, it might have looked a little complex, but it's simpler than most microbiology, and we can spot human fecal pollution 100% of the time in many places around the world. It's based on the interactions of a bacterium and these phage, viruses that attack the bacterium. But if you're interested, come and talk to me. I'm not going to go into detail tonight. What I also like, I said that I got dreadful attention deficit disorder. If I was sat in my office or even the lab every day, I'd go stir crazy. I do get out in the field. Bit of philosophy for you. Heraclitus said, you can never step into the same river twice. And I think that was a metaphor. I think he means that the environment is dynamic and it's moving and everything changes. But sometimes that's a nice day out, that's in the north of France. But when you're standing at the side of the River Ouse on a wet November morning at 6 o'clock for the 10th time, you think, well, was he really right? So we've started applying it. What's really nice in the last couple of years is that it's not just a laboratory technique. We've got a tool that we can tell people, for example, here, there's much more human fecal pollution. It tends to be downstream from wastewater treatment plants. By the way, we just use the River Ouse because it's local. I'm not saying that the River Ouse is particularly polluted, but it is very local, and we can do these sorts of mapping exercises. And I also need to point out the funders. This wouldn't have happened without the support of Interreg and the European Regional Development Fund, who've helped us work in catchments in England and the north of France. We've been doing this in collaboration with our French colleagues, and that's been great. So we've learnt a lot, and we've started telling other people about it. And James Ebden and myself, with help from the Society for General Microbiology, went over to Brazil to present a workshop. And I taught it through the medium of very bad Portuguese. But they seemed to be very happy. They kept smiling in a way. I'll move on. We do publish stuff. That's what we have to do. To sum up microbial source tracking, we've developed a human-specific marker and at relatively low cost, and we're solving real problems. Our colleague and my PhD student, Athena Papatheodoulou, out in Cyprus, has actually found pollution in a river that nobody knew was there, and she's knocked on the door of the mayor in the village and said, your village is polluting this river. And he sort of jumped back. She said, I've got the evidence, and it's using this technique. And more recently, we're developing a method to be a surrogate for viral pathogens. So Diogo da Silva, who's in the audience, is finding that this marker, this new marker, correlates with norovirus, the thing that gives you winter vomiting virus. So you can check shellfish in a much cheaper method to test whether it's going to be safe or not. And we hope that combining microbial source tracking and mapping, we'll be able to prevent disease rather than say afterwards, look what happened. We can say this is going to happen under these weather conditions, this is going to happen, so don't swim in the water, do not drink from this water under these conditions. But we need to know more. Okay, so you're still with us? Have you drifted away yet? Probably. We're moving on to the next one. And this is a bit more exciting in a way, because, well, it was exciting for me and bloody terrifying, frankly. I was talking to Médecins Sans Frontières. They got in touch and they said, there's been an earthquake, a cholera epidemic, and we have cholera treatment centres, we normally infiltrate the wastewater into the ground, but we can't do that. The groundwater is so shallow, we can't safely infiltrate into the ground. We've got to treat it, and we've got to treat it quickly. And they said, somebody told us about a paper you wrote in 1994 about lime treatment. So I talked to them, I emailed them every night, gave them lots of advice, and then foolishly I said, by the way, if you'd like me to come to Haiti, I'm quite happy to do so. And the next email was okay, I bought your tickets, meet you at JFK on Sunday night. So I had to man up and head off to Haiti to work with my colleagues in Médecins Sans Frontières. And thanks also to Tom Curtis from the University of Newcastle, who was involved in this. So this was the paper, way back. Remember that photograph of me in a bad lab in Brazil back in the 90s? That's the work I was doing with Duncan Mara. And that work, cited 3 or 4 times, disappeared, moved on to other things. Almost 20 years later, people are now using this in Haiti to solve a real problem. As I say, my favorite expression in class when I was in Brazil, and that is a typical day in Brazil. I shall move on swiftly before you recognize which one's me. Okay. A map of the world, you recognize this, hopefully. Can you recognize where Haiti is? Well, it's very small. Hispaniola Island, Dominican Republic, Haiti is south of Cuba. A very small island, but the poorest country in the Americas. You can have a map based on land area, or the people at World Mapper do something very interesting and change the size of a country according to different parameters. So this is countries according to lack of access to clean drinking water, I believe. And there suddenly, United States disappears, United Kingdom disappears, but Haiti becomes a very big country indeed. So it was already a problem. That was before an earthquake and a cholera epidemic. These figures are already out of date. When cholera gets to a wealthy country, there might be a sudden outbreak of it, and then it will disappear. In a poor country like Haiti, it seems to get indigenous and reproduce in the environment, and it can come back after every rainy season. That's what's happening in Haiti now. And MSF are still out there, and they're still using our treatment technology to treat the waste at their cholera treatment centres. So I just went out for a couple of weeks for the glory. I didn't do the hard work of others, but these are a couple of photographs I took around town, and you'll see that water was important, clean water. So you saw tankers everywhere. And the construction industry, after an earthquake, at least the construction industry was doing very well. Collapsed buildings around the cholera treatment centre. And that was bad enough. I thought that was pretty awful. One day I was taken into the centre of town, and it was just appalling and shocking. And it's one of those situations where you put the camera down. You can't take photographs. When people are living on rubble, there's a collapsed cathedral, people are living in tents on the rubble and have been there for a year. You can't take photographs of that. So, we are, with the help of Médecins Sans Frontières, we are treating the wastewater from cholera treatment centres. Wastewater packed with this pathogen. If that got out into the environment, it can cause more disease. Sadly, other organisations, through desperation, are using a different alternative. They're taking their wastewater full of this pathogen to the site called Toutière, which is a landfill site. And people live on this land site, and pathogens are being put there. Thankfully, MSF Holland, the organisation I worked with, thought that was wrong, never did it. And through my collaboration with them, we've managed to find a way to treat the wastewater safely. This is a cholera treatment centre. If you get into the hospital quickly enough and get fluids rapidly enough, over 48 hours, you will survive. But obviously, concentrating people into an area brings these very dangerous feces together, and that's our job, was to treat it. So glamorous work, as you can see. Buckets of stools to be transported around. Pretentious, moi, as Miss Piggy would say. But la gaunt de oug, this was my glove. The point is that we were using lime. That didn't look like lime to me. The lime I used when I worked with Duncan looked like nice pure cocaine. But if your pusher were to sell you that, you wouldn't be very happy. This was the only material we had available to us at one stage to treat the wastewater. So in an emergency situation, it can be difficult. And this was the lab, which I took in a suitcase and assembled. And worked in the lab with rats crawling over my feet, wishing I'd taken more material with me. That's all we had available to us. So, an awful lot of work. I did a little bit. A guy called Emanuele Sozzi, who I'm going to introduce you to in a second, has done an awful lot more work on this. But the bottom line is that this, in the river going past the hospital, I tested the water upstream. And these were the fecal bacteria in the water, millions and millions, something like 10 to the 6 E. coli. It's like sewage coming through the town. Our treatment system, 10 mil, we didn't spot any. So I know that's very bad science, and the paper will have a lot more information, but the bottom line is that we are disinfecting the water very cheaply. That's the system, very high tech, as you can see, and very significant removal of pathogens. So, amongst the workers out there, you will see one face reappearing. And this psychopathic Italian with the monkey wrench is this chap doing the IT, because we headhunted him. This guy, Emanuele Sozzi, was a public health engineer with Médecins Sans Frontières. He's now our latest PhD student in the group. And with the research challenges funding from the University of Brighton for £50,000, thank you, University of Brighton, we're carrying on this work in Brighton over the next year. So, moving ahead. Final case study. The wine's almost in your hand, remember that. We're moving now on to Malawi. Apologies for the carbon footprint, but there you go. In Malawi, I've had the pleasure of working with staff of UNICEF, also the pleasure of receiving their money to do this. But it's a collaboration between the University of Brighton and the Polytechnic of the University of Malawi. And our good friends now and collaborators, Jeffrey Chavula and Owen Kaputsama, who are doing an awful lot of work. Remember I mentioned we had to go to 400 villages, both in the dry season and the wet season. Don't know if you know much about Malawi, but there's no fuel. So it's very difficult to keep UNICEF happy and keep the data coming in when you just can't get the fuel to go out there. I've been out for a few weeks, James has been out, Richard Phillips has been out, but these are the guys who have been doing the work week after week after week, getting these samples in. And the final data came in yesterday. We're ready to analyse it and produce the final report. Malawi was a wonderful experience. I hope to go back there next month. This is not what you would see on their tourist guides, though. It is a very, very friendly and beautiful country, but it does have problems. Very high infant mortality, poor water supply, and clearly these two link. UNICEF is the United Nations Children's Fund. So why are they funding water and sanitation research? It's obvious in that the clearest indicator between reducing infant mortality is to improve the drinking water. Some of you will remember the Millennium Development Goals. Some of you will. I said this in class. Do you remember the Millennium Development Goals? And somebody looked blank. I said, year 2000? And this guy said, well, yeah, but I was 6. so time goes on. Where's the water? It's actually hidden away in here, but there is a target to reduce by half the number of people without access to, do they say safe? No, they say improved drinking water by the year 2015. And we are going to hit that target in many parts of the world. Improved drinking water. Sadly, that doesn't mean safe water, as we've realized in Mozambique. So according to the United Nations, anything that complies with improved water, any of these are fine. So bottled water, that's no good. It's very clean, but how are you going to sustainably give that to 100,000 people over many, many years? You've got to have a safe source. And they say that these sources will, if you have this, your water's improved. So to go out there and to look at some of these boreholes, and particularly the protected dug wells, and find that there's 100 times more fecal bacteria, 1,000 times more fecal bacteria than we'd ever accept in our drinking water, was quite a shock to me. I thought improved water meant safe water. It doesn't mean that. Thank you to one of my MSc students, Maria Froberg, who's doing a GIS project on this data for mapping, an initial mapping of all the places that we've been sampling in Malawi. And why is this here? Well, I just like the photograph. This is a baobab tree. Found it everywhere in Malawi. And I show this photograph to show that I'm not a geologist, because if I was a geologist, for scale, I'd put a hammer next to it. I reckon a small child is much better. It's not just a question of water quality. It's a matter of where it is and how accessible it is. In this village, there was a pump in the middle of the village, but it was broken. Somebody's stolen the metal from it. So these kids were going 5 or 6 miles to the next village to collect water every day. So how do you combine that with schooling? I don't know. But you do see good practice, nice clean buckets, irrigated fields. It can be done. It's simple, but it's clean. This looks clean, but who knows? This is not very good practice. An open well, even though it might look clear, you can't see viruses. And when it goes wrong, and somebody says the pump is more valuable in metal, selling the metal, than having a clean water supply, that's what you end up with. Right. Before we leave Malawi, I want to tell you one anecdote about this. From the 400 villages, we got to one, and there were 2 pumps. There was, these aren't them, I couldn't find the photograph, but very close to each other. There was a low-cost shallow well, and one of these boreholes with an AfriDev pump. This is very well-designed water supply, in close proximity. So when I talked to one of the villagers, and I said, well, how do you choose which one you drink from? He said, well, the people who pay their funds into the water committee can use this one. If you don't have the money to pay for the water committee, you have to drink from this one. And those are the results. From that village, the wealthy people were drinking this water. Those that didn't have the money were drinking this water. This is 200 times over the WHO standards for drinking water. So poverty does kill, it's quite clear. We can't do microbiology in every village in the whole of Africa, so with the help of others, we're developing nice simple tests so that we can screen whole regions. This is called the hydrogen sulfide test, and it gives us some idea which villages are more contaminated than others. I'm sorry if this is a little bit flippant. I'll blame Dave Nash. Dave Nash works over in Malawi. He sent me back this photograph. I know of the queues for petrol in Malawi, but this sort of shows the stoicism that somebody a pizza company said, are you queuing at the petrol station all weekend? We'll deliver pizza to you. So the problems have become permanent, really. As I said, UNICEF is the children's fund, and it's all about water supply. When you go to a village, you go to 20 villages a day. It could be boring, but when you've got kids around you laughing and smiling, it's an amazing experience. But it is upsetting to think that when you meet 10 children like this, that 1 or 2 of them is not going to make it to adulthood. So we're very proud of ourselves. I think it's probably the largest ever survey of drinking water quality in Malawi. And the data's coming in. There's going to be an awful lot of data set, and you'll forgive me if I don't tell you what I think is coming out of this today. I think I ought to tell UNICEF before I tell you. But some clear patterns are emerging about what conditions lead to clean water, what conditions lead to dirty water, what is the cost, what's the cost-benefit analysis, how can you do it cheaply and safely. The next trick is to not bury that in an academic paper, but to work with the government to develop water safety plans for the country. So I hope to go out there next month, till a long way, to talk to government ministers and help them develop water safety plans for the country. We're coming to the end. At this point, I want to dedicate this lecture to my brother, Phil, who sadly died 10 years ago. So he was an amazing influence on me, and supportive, a scientist, a teacher, a father and a brother to me, and he's missed very much. But there are lots of other people to acknowledge. At this point, there is one more video. So I took a video camera out to Malawi, and these are some of the experiences. I realize that video editing is a lot more complex. Don't leave it to the last minute. Top tip. We took one of our MSc students out. This is Armando from Venezuela, who came out and did some work with us the first time we went out. It's always good to share the research with our MSc students as much as possible. This is Richard Phillips, the guy from Pump Aid, explained to Richard the design of the elephant pump. Health and safety, don't sit next that side when somebody's pumping you at that side. I never put that on the risk assessment form, but I got a very sore head. Richard's got the hat on, so he must be in charge at this point. Bald, middle-aged man with water. Always an audience. And this is microbiology in the raw, out in the field. The lady behind is the local health visitor. And of course, we couldn't go barging into villages going, hello, I want to test your water, without somebody introducing us properly. We got a feeling that some of the bacteria we're counting are actually multiplying inside that nice warm condition, and that was James testing for them. Talking to villagers, keeping records. I'm not very good at that. And life goes on. It might be exciting for us, but for other people, day-to-day life goes on. More microbiology in a nice hotel, frankly, but counting bacteria the next day. Owen Kapuzuma. I hope he'll come and do an MSc with us next year. He hasn't got the funding yet, but I'm hoping he's going to come over and do MSc. This is the hydrogen sulfide test. That was the village. That was the water that the poor people were drinking. That's the water after the test that the wealthier people who could pay the water committee would be drinking. Lake Chilwa, whenever there's rain, you get cholera here, regular every rainy season. And very dirty water. And this is sometimes what the pumps you find. And absolutely filthy water coming out of them. No maintenance. Whereas this is good. Put a fence around it. Stop the chickens going on it. It's quite simple. That's the end of it, I think. Thanks, Emma. So we're coming to a close, you'll be glad to know, because we're all getting thirsty. Acknowledgements. As I say, Gwyneth Paltrow, this is not about me. Well, it is. But it's taken a lot of help from an awful lot of people here today. And I might, there's so many names here, but I might cherry pick a few people. I can't mention Duncan again. He's been a great influence on me. If I mention my line managers, for example, Peter Gardner and Andrew Lloyd and Callum Firth. I think that's called Stockholm Syndrome, isn't it? but I will mention them because they have been supportive. It took a little while to persuade them of my genius, but they got there in the end. Bless them. I'm trying to pick out some other names. This is at the point where you speed read through this, you realise your name's not there, and you blank me over the canapes. Who else can I pick out? I was going to pick out Amelia. Where's Amelia Curtis? Hello, Amelia. When I first came to Brighton, Amelia worked at the council, and she gave me my very first grant. She gave me £20,000, and I got a wetsuit, and I went out sampling in the water, and it all came from there. And she kept reminding me at a restaurant in France. She kept saying, "You'd be nothing without me." It's partly true. So, conclusions. As I say, I am not dissing the medical profession. And I'm very pleased there are antibiotics and vaccinations. This is essential. It's changed the world for so many people. But the world is complex. There is certainly climate uncertainty. And I believe that in parallel with this biomedical solution to our problems, we've got to think more about how the infectious diseases behave in the environment. So what has the biomedical route, the germ theory, ever done for us? Well, quite a lot, actually. Another quote for you. Some very famous epidemiologists back in, when would this be, the 80s perhaps, but a bit later. We need to be equally concerned with causal pathways at the societal level and with pathogenesis and causality at the molecular level. So, it's just as important to work out how a gene works as to how a water pump in Malawi works. It's all part of the same equation. We're all working together on this. And I do realise that some scientists, it's their natural inclination to be specialists, and we can do that. You can be the geek specialising in your certain area. That's fine. You can leave it to people like me with attention deficit disorder to go running around doing lots of things badly. But we do need to think of it all in the whole and try and bring it together at times. And it's not just about mortality. I've told you about waterborne disease, drinking it, diarrhea, children dying within a couple of days. But this is a photograph I took out in Malawi. Stunting. Both these children are 12 years old. And one cause of stunting is diarrhea in early age, before the age of 5. If you get diarrhea continually, it's pretty clear now that your development is stunted, and it's not just your height, it's your IQ development as well. So if we can put on more pressure to solve this problem, it's going to have a big impact on development issues around the world. But it all sounds very grand, and I've been showing off an awful lot. We need to be a little bit cynical about this. And thanks to Paul, who, under the name of Polyp, the cartoonist, who gave me permission to show this photograph, which I saw in New Internationalist a few years ago. And I thought I'd never be like that. But then I get flown over to Haiti, and I'm doing exactly that. So, in the long term, you shouldn't be needing to fly experts from the West to developing countries to solve these problems. The future is education. And the British university system has got a role to play in this. If we can just encourage the British Border Agency to allow these students to come into our universities, it would help. But in the longer term, we should also be working with universities in Africa to develop their courses. I've been running an MSc in water and environmental management for 10 years. I know what works and what doesn't work. And perhaps we can be working with African universities to develop postgraduate research and teaching in Africa. So, I'm obviously getting on my hobby horse, but don't take any of this too seriously. Rule number 1, don't pay too much attention to what I'm blathering on about. It's up to you to decide what's right and wrong. I do believe that a better understanding of microbial ecology and a more interdisciplinary focus may provide better protection against current and future waterborne diseases in uncertain times. And I'm not doing enough of this. We're working with the University of Malawi, but I'd love to do more teaching on their courses and bring their lecturers and swap students. We could learn so much from each other. So I think that imaginative research has a big role to play in solving real problems. And I also think, I always think you should keep an open mind, but not so open that your brain falls out. So, really coming to an end, my career plan. I hope I haven't got to this position wading through the blood of my colleagues and students. Others might say differently. But when I think of my career, I think it's summed up in a cartoon by Ashley Brilliant. Thank you for listening.